Hey there, Home Fit family. In today's episode, we are going to be talking all things legal, really. So I have Danielle Guisinger with us today from Hope Law Firm. So let's welcome her to the show. Hey, Danielle.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, so glad that you are here. Today is kind of a big conversation because there's so many things that you help clients with in terms of a home purchase. So coming at you with a lot of questions today.
Okay.
Appreciate you being here. One of the first things that I wanted to start off with is, I see a lot of clients who are purchasing homes in today's market for sale by owner, also known as FSBO. So how can you explain the importance of having representation by you? When someone's looking to purchase a home or even sell a home for sale by owner?
Sure. One of the most important things when you're buying a home and there is not an agent or a representative involved is ensuring that the purchase agreement is done correctly. It gives you all the different contingencies to be able to back out of the contract if something doesn't go through correctly. So when people aren't using proper representation, they put together a document that may not have the correct legalities in the event that something would go wrong down the way. And also there are specific inspections and things that people will want to do, and if they don't include that in the contract, it doesn't get done, and then you're kind of out of luck when it comes down to the point that you want to do that. Also, there's just other items involved like legal descriptions, inspections, loans that have other outside forces involved, so it's just important to have somebody involved that knows what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. It's one of the biggest purchases that you make in your lifetime, so to not have any representation from a realtor or from an attorney, I think just kind of sets you up for a bumpy road.
Right.
All right, so you mentioned inspections, and I know personally I've been through a couple of hiccups in the road because I learned that septic inspections are required and there's some type of, title of transfer for a septic. Will you explain that for us?
Sure. So when there is a septic tank on the property, or when you are not on the public sewage disposal, you have to have a time of transfer report done by somebody who's approved by the state. And those can take some time, so it's important that it gets ordered right away. And that inspector will explain to us in a report if there are any deficiencies in the septic, at which point you go back to the drawing board between the two parties to determine who is going to pay for it, what are we going to do to fix it, and how long is that going to take, and can it be done before closing. Mm-hmm. That time of transfer report is then provided to all of the parties, and you have to have it in order to close. It gets attached to the groundwater hazard form, which is in your deed package at the time of closing, and if you don't have it, then it can't be recorded and your transfer can't go through.
Okay, good to know. One of the other things that we kind of run into, or just to provide information, is an abstract. So will you tell everyone what is an abstract and maybe where they could find theirs?
Sure. So a lot of people don't understand what abstracts are. They are typically legal-sized documents that look like a book that open this way, not this way. And it's the basically history of all the documents recorded from either the time of the plat or the time that the division became. And you have to have it to sell. Most of the time, your abstract is either handed to you at the closing table or it goes back to the abstractor who did the initial update. If you go back to your lender who did your loan when you bought the property, they typically will know where that abstract went. And if they don't, most closing companies or attorneys have a list of the local abstractors who can send out emails and say, hey, do any of you have this? And if nobody can find it and you can't find it, it's still okay. You just have to order a new one to be made. It takes a little bit longer and it's pretty expensive.
Yes, yep. We always try and have people at the closing table because they're getting so much information that day, mark on something as to where their abstract is going, so that if all else fails, they have a note somewhere, even if they need to locate that paperwork that they'll have. Mm-hmm. So, all right, so somebody gets their abstract, that gets updated, and then what happens from there in a process for a home purchase?
So the lender is who picks who the attorney is that reads the abstract. So when I'm doing a closing and a title opinion, I receive the abstract in my office and I read the abstract and provide a title opinion. The title opinion will show the buyer and the lender all of the things that could either be liens on the property or just items that we want the buyer to be aware of, such as easements or homeowners associations and stuff like that. And then once the abstract is read, we usually keep it until closing in case it needs to be updated or the transaction fails, so we can send it back. And then the title opinion is provided, and then you go on your merry way.
Good. So that kind of brings me to another point, and that is, on the loan application, a lot of times it'll say, how is the deed or title to be held? Do you have any recommendations for a first-time home buyer as to how they should go about that?
So if you're a single person buying it by yourself, there's no vesting. It's when you have more than one person that vesting is important. So there's two ways that two people can take title. They can either take it as joint tenants or tenants in common. And most of the time I suggest joint tenants, because if you and I owned a house together and we held the property as joint tenants and I pass away, you automatically get the property and it's like we both own 100% of it. However, if we're tenants in common, we each own 50% of the property. So if I pass away, my half gets probated or goes through my will or whatever it is that I directed my share to go to before you can sell the property. So I always suggest that people do joint tenants. Unless it's some sort of investment type property, that's when you usually see some people say tenants in common is more beneficial for them.
Okay, that's a great explanation. Thank you for that. All right, so one of the things that I wanted to discuss with you today is when we have a client that is going through a divorce. So will you kind of share with us some of the maybe documents that a client can have, whether they are going to be refinancing to remove the soon-to-be ex-spouse off of the mortgage, or if they are going to be purchasing a home because they have moved out of the marital home?
So it always depends on where exactly they are at in the divorce process. Sometimes the purchases or refinances happen prior to the divorce being final, and then obviously there are times when it happens after the divorce is final, and both of them have different situations or suggestions I would have. Of course, always discuss with your divorce attorney the ramifications and different items regarding buying and selling real estate while you're married. But since Iowa is a dower state, your spouse always has a dower interest in your home until your divorce is final. So if you and your spouse are getting divorced but it is not final and you decide to purchase a home for you to live in, you have to be cognizant that your soon-to-be ex-spouse has dower interest in that property, and the new house needs to be addressed in your divorce decree. If it's not addressed in the divorce decree, you just have to kind of hope and pray that that ex-spouse doesn't come back and say that, hey, I own half of this because you purchased it during our marriage. It's most important, and I think safer for everybody, to have that soon-to-be ex-spouse sign a quitclaim deed releasing all rights to that property after the divorce is final. If you have a really ugly situation where you're not really sure your soon-to-be ex-spouse is going to sign anything for you just because you're not getting along and things aren't going very well between the two of you, you can have your divorce attorney put a section in your divorce decree that says you want to quiet the title in the one person who bought the home, and that if a quitclaim deed is not obtainable, that you direct the clerk to change title into that person's name. That way, if you can't get that signature from that spouse, you provide that decree, and then the title can be changed to that person's name.
Okay, so you mentioned a quitclaim deed. So when you sign a quitclaim deed, does that actually remove your name from the mortgage?
It does not remove your name from any financial aspect. So it only removes your name from title. So if you are in a tricky situation where you're also on the mortgage and note for a property, I suggest not signing a quitclaim deed, only because then you get wrapped up still in the loan, the outstanding loan on the property, and you have no say in the matter anymore because you're no longer a title holder. So that typically is something I always suggest to make sure you address in your divorce, if there's no verbiage in the divorce telling one of the parties or the party that ultimately kept the property to refinance within a certain period of time, it just simply awarded them the property and the debt with it. That person doesn't have to and is not ordered by any court to refinance. And so you basically are liable on a note for a home that you no longer have title to. So it's important to make sure that you know that one goes with the other. Now, if you were not on the mortgage and the note originally when the house was purchased, signing a quitclaim deed isn't going to affect anything because you're not liable for the funds owed on that property.
Thank you, Danielle. I think that's an excellent explanation and hopefully provides a lot of great information for our viewers. You had mentioned that that in the divorce decree that the attorney should mention that the individual needs to refinance, the person keeping the home needs to refinance. Is there a typical time frame that you would recommend be placed in there as well?
Sometimes it just depends on the financial ability of the parties. Of course, putting a short time frame on somebody to refinance that just isn't in a financial position to do so or can't be approved by a lender because of financial issues, you're basically putting yourself between a rock and a hard place. I typically say 90 to 120 days after the divorce is final, having that refinance done is what you would typically see asked of the parties. Of course, if there's other items, that are being addressed in the divorce financially, sometimes you see that longer period or a shorter period, depending on basically what other assets that they have that they could leverage to do that. Also, it also depends on whether or not they're going to sell the property as well. And I have seen, and what I've always suggested to people is if you give a deadline, say, hey, you have to refinance within 90 days of the decree. If you leave it at that and they can't get approved by a mortgage lender, a court doesn't see that as a contempt of court and nothing can be enforced because it's not that the person is willfully disobeying the court order. They tried to refinance, they just can't. Then at that point, your hands are tied and there's nothing more you can do. So what I always suggest is make sure in your divorce decree it says if they cannot refinance within this time frame, then they have to sell the property, or then the other person can have the property if they can refinance, and just make sure that you have basically contingency in place so that if they aren't able to, you're not stuck on this mortgage forever and a day.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I think that's a great point because there are going to be different situations that pop up, but the biggest piece is just having, whether it's option A, option B, but just the options in there that are specific to protect everybody. All right, so everybody gets to come to the closing table, and so now we're ready and we're going to meet at Settle Up. So that's where you do most of our closings. What can a new homeowner expect to bring to the closing table that day?
Sure, so really the buyer just needs to bring their identification and their money. Outside of that, we pretty much handle everything to make sure that they have all the proper paperwork to sign. And depending on where you're closing at, but for me specifically, when I do closings, I make sure that the buyer, especially a first-time buyer, understands what they need to do after closing. That typically is the part that people just kind of leave them. Some agents and lenders don't always do follow-ups after, so I always like to make sure the buyer understands to sign up for their homestead credit prior to the following July 1st so that they can make sure that they get that credit. Making sure they understand, these are the letters and information you might receive from the abstractor and what you should do when you receive that. And talking them through escrow and taxes, because first-time homebuyers do receive those letters in the mail that look like invoices for their taxes, and they always panic, but I always try to remind them that they don't have to worry about that. But really all we ever need is their ID, and their money.
So can I just can I have a home buyer bring you a duffel bag of cash?
Oh yeah, no, that's not gonna work. That's a good point. We require funds to be certified, so either a cashier's check or a wire. Some settlement agents, including myself, if it's under $500, the buyer's cash to close is less than $500, then we will take a personal check.
Okay, that's great to know. We always get those last minute questions as to how much money do I need to bring, and I have this cash at home, can I bring that? No.
That's not going to work. Also, some people do come straight to their purchase from their sale, And so most, not all, settlement agents will receive or accept the check from your closing. So if you close your sale at a different brokerage and you have your proceeds check, and for ease of math, it's $100, and you bring it to me, you can endorse it to me, and you were only supposed to owe me $80, I would cut them a check back for $20. That way you don't have to deposit it, hope that it clears in time, and then bring me a new check.
Oh, well, that's super helpful. All right, Danielle, so if clients have more questions, legal questions, or they're looking for more information, what's the best way for them to reach you?
The best way to reach me is by calling the office or sending me an email.
Perfect. We'll make sure that we add that information to the post today. I appreciate you stopping by. You provided a plethora of information for everybody and a lot of education that is very important.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. Until next time, stay committed to your health and home goals.